signal? 72 seconds long. No distortion, no static, no source. It was recorded once, and then it vanished. That was in 1977. For 5 decades, the universe went silent again, until now. No one knows who sent it. No one knows why it came back. But one thing is certain. We are no longer alone. Chapter 1, 1977, The Wow Signal. August 15th, 1977. A quiet summer night in Ohio. The Big Ear radio telescope was scanning the sky, as it had done for years, tirelessly listening to the endless hum of the cosmos. This night was not supposed to be different. The data came in like usual, printed on long rolls of computer paper, numbers and letters in lines that only a few people in the world could truly read. The team operating the telescope wasn't expecting anything remarkable. They were scientists, used to silence, used to static. But that night, they caught something. At 10:16 p.m. local time, the telescope locked onto a signal. Not just any signal. This one was different, strong, narrow, band, clean, for 72 seconds. The radio receiver picked up a stream of data that stood out like a scream in the void. It didn't come from Earth. It didn't match any known satellite, nor any natural radio source. It rose and fell in intensity, exactly the way a real source would, as the Earth's rotation swept the telescope's line of sight across it. It behaved like something real, something distant, something deliberate. The man who noticed it was Dr. Jerry Eman, a volunteer working with the SETI project. He was going through printouts by hand, highlighting unusual values, just like he had done 100 times before. But then he saw it, a cluster of alpha characters 6EQ, UJ5, right in the middle of the page. It meant nothing to most people, but to him it was unmistakable. A clear, powerful spike in signal strength. So unusual, in fact, that he grabbed his red pen and circled it. Next to it, he scribbled one word: wow. That simple, human reaction gave the signal its now legendary name, the Wow Signal. No one has ever explained it. No one has ever found its source. For decades, scientists tried to rationalize its interference from Earth, perhaps. But that doesn't fit. The frequency 1420 MHz is the natural emission line of hydrogen, and it's a band protected for radio astronomy. No terrestrial transmitter is allowed to broadcast on it. If it wasn't Earth, then it came from somewhere else, somewhere out there. The signal originated from the direction of the constellation Sagittarius, near the Chi Sagittarii star group. That's all we know. It never repeated. The telescope was unable to scan the same area immediately again because of its fixed structure. It could only wait for the Earth's rotation to bring the spot back. But when it did, the signal was gone. SETI researchers spent weeks pointing every receiver they had toward the region. They heard nothing, just static, just silence. And maybe that silence was worse, because the signal itself was too perfect, too structured, too short. It didn't drift in frequency like a natural phenomenon would. It held steady. It spoke, then it stopped, like a whisper, intentional and brief. A flare in the dark, a hand raised, and then pulled away. Over the years, attempts to recreate the signal or detect it again have all failed. Some scientists have suggested a comet might have been responsible, but that's unlikely. Others proposed some kind of reflection from space debris, but no debris is known to behave that way, and none was recorded nearby at the time. More than 4 decades later, we still don't know what made it. We know this, though, if someone or something was trying to contact us, they would probably use the 1420 MHz hydrogen line. It's universal, the most basic building block of the universe, a logical choice for an intelligent message. That's why SETI monitors it so closely, and that's why the wow signal was so terrifying, because it was exactly what we'd been listening for. And then it happened, and no one knew what to do. Imagine being Jerry Emin. You're holding a piece of paper, just numbers and letters, until you realize those characters might represent the first time humanity has ever heard from someone else. You sit in your office, silent, surrounded by machines that cannot feel awe, and you are the first human being on Earth to understand that something might have spoken back. What do you do? Who do you call? No alien fleet appeared. No response followed. The signal came, and then it didn't. For 72 seconds, something looked at us, or shouted, or reached out, and then it disappeared. Maybe it never meant to return. Maybe it was a mistake. Or maybe it was the beginning of something that would take longer than a human lifetime to unfold. That was 1977. Since then, thousands of signals have been recorded, but none quite like that one. None that felt so clean, so out of place, so intentional. Scientists don't like the word mystery. They prefer anomaly. But in this case, they both apply. The wow signal is a mystery. A single, unforgettable moment when the universe blinked, when the endless night whispered something we didn't understand, and then fell silent again. To this day, the signal remains officially unexplained. It has no known origin, no known cause, and no known repeat. But for those who study the sky, those who sit alone in dark rooms, listening to the stars, it remains a constant question, a symbol, a reminder that maybe we are not alone, that maybe once, just once, something tried to say hello. Jerry Emin had seen a lot of data in his time working with radio telescopes. Most of it was nothing, a sea of low-level noise. Occasional spikes caused by satellites, aircraft, or interference from Earth. But when he saw the series of alphanumeric characters, 6EQ-UJ5, printed on the readout from August 15, 1977, he paused. The intensity values of the signal, as coded in those letters and numbers, weren't just statistically unusual. They were extraordinary. He circled the sequence with a red pen, and in the margin, he wrote a single word: wow. It wasn't a scientific label. It was a human reaction, brief, spontaneous, and honest. And that one word would become the name of the most famous, unexplained radio signal in human history. At first, the discovery didn't make headlines. This was still the 1970s. There was no internet, no Twitter, no viral content. It took days for the information to spread beyond the scientific team. And when it did, it spread slowly. A few science journals picked it up, then a handful of local newspapers. Then, gradually, the story reached the broader public. The idea that a possible alien signal had been heard was too compelling to ignore. Headlines appeared in small columns. Possible message from the stars. Astronomers stunned by mysterious signal. Some treated it like a joke. Others took it seriously. But what struck people most was how little was said. By the institutions we expected to speak, NASA said nothing. No statement, no confirmation, no denial. The agency, which had just launched Voyager 1 and 2 that same year, remained entirely silent on the matter. When asked, officials either said they had no comment, or that the signal wasn't from one of their sources. That was it. For something so extraordinary, the official response was total restraint. Within the scientific community, the reaction was mixed. Some were cautiously intrigued, others skeptical, and a few were genuinely unsettled. But across the board, there was an undeniable unease. Because if the signal was real, if it was intentional, it meant someone or something had sent it. And that opened a door no one was ready to walk through. The SETI researchers, including Emin himself, began the task of trying to verify what had happened. They rechecked the equipment. They reviewed the logs. They ruled out terrestrial sources, military interference, broadcast signals, satellites. Nothing fit. They even tried to replicate the signal pointing the Big Ear telescope and others at the same region of the sky for months afterward. But the signal never returned. It was a one-time event, a singular moment, and the more they looked for it, the more frustrating it became. Because the universe, which had briefly spoken, had gone quiet again, and that silence felt heavy. Emin later said in interviews that he didn't believe the signal was necessarily from an alien civilization. He was trained not to jump to conclusions, but he admitted that he had no explanation. No one did. And that was the part that troubled everyone most. In the years that followed, theories emerged. Some suggested it was a natural astrophysical event we didn't yet understand. Others believed it was a military transmission that had somehow slipped into the wrong channel. But those theories had problems. The frequency the signal was detected on 1420 MGs is reserved for radio astronomy. No Earth-based transmitter is allowed to use it. And natural sources, pulsars, quasars, cosmic background radiation don't produce signals with that kind of structure. The WOW signal wasn't noise. It was narrowband and strong, purposeful. Despite the lack of answers, funding for SETI remained limited. Some in the scientific establishment viewed the search for extraterrestrial intelligence as speculative, unscientific, or even fringe, and with no repeat detection, the WOW signal began to fade from public attention. But within certain circles, quietly, it remained a subject of fascination. There was something else, too, something unspoken. It wasn't just the lack of answers that unsettled people. It was the possibility that someone already had them and wasn't saying. The lack of engagement from major agencies. The abrupt end to investigation in the media. The quiet distancing of universities that once showed interest. It all felt coordinated. Not in a dramatic, conspiratorial sense, but in a slow, institutional way. Like the topic had become radioactive. Something you weren't supposed to talk about too loudly. Some scientists admitted they were hesitant to even bring it up in grant proposals. The fear wasn't that they would be laughed at. It was that they would be ignored. That their work would be marked as unserious. So the signal, once a source of wonder, became a kind of silent question. One that hung in the background, unsolved, and eventually unspoken. And yet, for those who had been there, for the small group of researchers, who saw the raw data, who heard the tapes, who looked at the numbers, something about it stayed with them. It was too precise, too isolated, too calm. It wasn't like anything else in the archives. And that's why they remembered it. Not because it was spectacular, but because it wasn't. It was clean, direct, measured, like a test, like something that wanted to be noticed once and then never again. As the years passed, the story of the WOW signal became part of SETI lore. New generations of researchers heard about it, read the old reports, ran new scans of the same region, but nothing ever came back. And the more time passed, the more the signal felt like a ghost, an echo from something we never understood, and maybe never would. And so the scientific community did what it often does with unexplained phenomena. It archived it. It classified it as unknown, filed the papers away, and moved on. But there was always a quiet discomfort in that, because deep down, no one was sure if the signal had truly ended, or if it was only the first sentence in a conversation that hadn't begun yet. In private, a few scientists admitted they were afraid, not afraid of aliens, but of what it would mean if we were no longer the only ones listening. Because if someone else was out there capable of sending a message across light years, brief and exact, they were ahead of us, possibly far ahead. And if they had reached out once, they might again, and maybe next time, the signal wouldn't be so easy to miss. Chapter 2. The silence that followed. From the moment the WOW signal was recorded in 1977, one question lingered above all others. Would it happen again? For decades, the answer was no. From 1978 to 2020, more than 30 radio observatories around the world attempted to detect a repeat of the signal. They pointed massive satellite dishes back to the same place in the sky. They scanned the hydrogen line, the same frequency. They waited for days, then weeks, then years, and still nothing came back. Nothing even close. The signal that had once pierced the silence was gone. Or worse, it had never intended to come back. CTI made it a priority. After all, this was the best candidate they'd ever had for an extraterrestrial transmission, strong, narrowband, centered precisely on the hydrogen line, and utterly unique. So they watched. They built better receivers, more sensitive instruments. They coordinated with NASA, with the European Space Agency, with universities across the United States. But the sky didn't care. Every scan of the Sagittarius region returned the same result: static. Some tried to explain it. Maybe it was a one-off natural event, something rare that only occurred under specific cosmic conditions. Maybe it was a mistake, a reflection, an error in the recording. But no one could replicate it. No known natural source behaves that way. And if it had been artificial, well, why say nothing more? Why not follow up? The silence stretched out over decades. At first, it was frustrating. Then it became something else, something heavier, something closer to resignation. The sense that whatever had happened on that night in August 1977 wasn't meant to be a conversation, that it was more like a flare, a brief flash in the dark, and then nothing. Some of the original researchers retired. Some passed away. Others moved on to new projects, new signals, new instruments. But the WOW signal remained a ghost at the edge of every discussion. It had not been disproven, but it had not returned. And in science, silence is a kind of death. A result that can't be repeated is not a result, it's a mystery. And mysteries are uncomfortable. That didn't stop people from trying. Every few years, a new attempt would be made. The Allen Telescope Array, Arecibo, the Green Bank telescope, all focused on Sagittarius, all hoping that maybe this time the voice would speak again. But each attempt ended the same way, with clean data, quiet skies, and no sign of the thing they were listening for. SETI even launched dedicated campaigns, entire missions focused on following up the WOW signal. These efforts brought new technology into the field: more precise tuning, broader frequency coverage, better data processing. But even as the instruments improved, the sky remained stubbornly quiet. The exact combination of signal strength, duration, and frequency had never been observed again. Whatever had happened in 1977 was, at least for now, a singular event. The public largely forgot. News cycles moved on. Other mysteries took the spotlight. But within the astronomy and radio science communities, the WOW signal was never truly forgotten. It lingered like an itch at the edge of the known, a possibility never proven false. And every so often, someone new would look into the old data and wonder, what did we miss? Because the truth was, the more time passed, the stranger it became. If it had been an accident, a glitch, a random spike, why hadn't it happened again? If it had been a deliberate transmission, why only once? The silence began to feel intentional, like something had sent a message, waited for us to notice, and then chose not to speak again, as if being seen once was enough. As if the point was never to begin a conversation, but simply to confirm that we were here, that we were listening, that we were capable of hearing. The SETI Institute, still active and still hopeful, would sometimes reference the signal in lectures or publications, but always with a kind of reverent distance. It had become a monument, less a question to be answered, and more a reminder of how vast the unknown still is. Because in 40 years of listening, we have not found anything else like it. Not a single signal with the same clarity, the same strength, the same characteristics. Not one. And that silence has weight. It forces you to consider uncomfortable possibilities. That maybe the universe is not teeming with life. That maybe it is cold and quiet and empty. Or worse, that it isn't empty at all, but filled with minds so distant from our own that they do not wish to speak to us. Or perhaps they already have, and are now only waiting. Scientists don't often say this out loud, but when asked privately, many admit the WOW signal haunts them, because it was everything they were looking for, and then it was gone. It fit all the criteria. It checked every box. It was perfect. And perfection, in science, is almost always suspicious, almost too good to be true. But there it was, on a piece of printer paper in 1977, written in ink and circled in red, a signal from nowhere, a whisper from the void. People moved on. Projects ended. Funding dried up. But the signal stayed. In textbooks, in research papers, in the minds of those who had come close to touching something impossible. And still, the sky remained silent, as if it wanted to be seen just once and then disappear forever. Some researchers believe the signal was a message, a greeting, perhaps from another civilization. They didn't say it publicly. In the world of science, especially in radio astronomy, speaking too confidently about extraterrestrial intelligence can damage careers. But in private conversations, in late-night emails and off-the-record interviews, the idea came up again and again. What if that 72-second burst was intentional? Not an accident, not a glitch, but a deliberate transmission aimed at us. or maybe sent blindly into the cosmos in hopes that someone, anyone, would be listening. There was something about the clarity of the signal, the clean frequency, the way it matched exactly what we'd always imagined an interstellar message might look like, too precise to be natural, too structured to ignore, and too brief to be coincidence. For those who spent their lives listening to the noise of the universe, the wow signal stood apart. It felt like something different, something crafted. Other theories were more cautious, but no less strange. Some scientists speculated that the signal may have come from a probe, a kind of autonomous device, launched long ago by a distant civilization. A machine meant to explore the galaxy, scanning star systems, gathering data, and occasionally sending out bursts of information when it detected intelligent life. If that were true, then maybe the wow signal was never meant for us directly. Maybe it was triggered by our radio emissions, our broadcasts, our radar, and responded with a single, short message before continuing on its way. A flyby, a passing nod from something older and more advanced, now already gone. That would explain the lack of follow-up, the silence, the fact that no similar signals were detected again. If it was a moving object, it would be long past us by now, out of range, out of reach. But not everyone believed the silence meant absence. There were those scientists, engineers, even former military personnel who believed the signal had been heard again. Maybe not by the public, maybe not even by SETI, but by someone, somewhere. They pointed to strange inconsistencies in how the signal was handled, how quickly it was archived and forgotten, how funding was quietly pulled from follow-up studies just a few years later. They noticed how certain observatories were suddenly restricted from rescanning the same coordinates, how some data logs from related monitoring efforts had gaps, missing files, unexplained deletions. They weren't making accusations, not directly, but they were asking a question that became more uncomfortable the longer it hung in the air. What if the signal came again, and someone decided not to tell us? Conspiracy theories, of course, took root quickly. The wow signal was cited by UFO enthusiasts, ancient alien theorists, and online forums dedicated to government secrecy. Some claimed it was intercepted in real time by intelligence agencies. Others insisted that the signal contained more than we were told, that it wasn't just a burst of radio energy, but encoded data, a message that someone had partially decoded and chosen to suppress. Those theories weren't taken seriously in academic circles, but they never went away, because the longer the silence stretched, the more plausible it began to seem that someone, somewhere, knew more than they were saying. Even within the scientific community, there were quiet doubts, not about the authenticity of the signal, but about what happened afterward. Why hadn't more resources been committed to tracking it? Why were there no major coordinated international efforts to study that part of the sky? Why was the one signal that matched all of SETI's criteria for potential intelligence treated with so much hesitation, then quietly forgotten? For a field that was supposedly dedicated to listening, the response to the wow signal had been strangely muted, as if listening was only acceptable when there was nothing to hear. Some believed the answer was simple: fear. The possibility that we had received a real signal from another intelligence was too big, too disruptive, not just to science, but to politics, religion, society as a whole. If someone had confirmed the signal's origin, and especially if it suggested intelligent life, What would happen next? Who would decide what to say in response? Would we say anything at all? Would we be allowed to? The questions weren't just scientific. They were existential. And so, many speculated, it was easier, safer not to know. To dismiss the signal, to label it unexplained and move on. That way, there was no need to confront the implications. No need to change how we saw the universe or ourselves. Others weren't so sure it was about fear. Some believed it was about control. That if the signal was real, if it was confirmed, it would become a matter of national security. The governments would classify it, bury it, and use the information quietly, without public disclosure. In that view, the wow signal was never forgotten. It was simply moved behind closed doors, and the real work, the real listening continued in silence, funded by budgets that never appeared on official spreadsheets. Of course, there's no proof of any of this. Only the absence of proof. Only the lingering sense that something important slipped through our fingers in 1977, and that maybe, just maybe, it didn't go unnoticed by everyone. In interviews decades later, Jerry Emmons said he still couldn't explain what he had seen. He remained skeptical of the extraterrestrial explanation, but he admitted he wished the signal had been explored more, that more people had cared, that it hadn't just faded into obscurity. For a moment, humanity might have heard something beyond itself, and instead of asking more questions, we let it go. And that, more than anything, is what troubled people the most. Not that the signal might have been from aliens, but that it might have been and we ignored it. Not because we didn't know better, but because we chose not to listen. In the end, the question changed. It was no longer about what the signal was, or where it came from. The real question became, who else heard it? And what did they do next? Chapter 3, 2025, The Return. April 2025. The Atacama Large Aperture Array. A new radio telescope built in the driest desert on Earth, was scanning a quiet patch of sky near the constellation Sagittarius. Its operators were not expecting anything unusual. They were running a routine calibration test, checking for residual atmospheric interference after a sandstorm had swept through the region. The system was cold. The sky was clear. Just past 3 a.m. UTC, one of the instruments detected a radio spike centered at precisely 1420.4556 MHz, the hydrogen line. At first, it didn't seem important, a blip, a possible error. But then it held. For 71 seconds, the telescope captured a signal, steady, unbroken, focused. It wasn't noise. It wasn't random. And most importantly, it wasn't new. The signal matched, nearly identically, the wow signal first recorded in 1977. Same frequency, same region, same strength, curve, same shape. But this time, the duration was 71 seconds, just 1 second shorter. In the control room, the initial reaction was disbelief. The team rechecked the system logs. They reviewed the weather telemetry, checked for satellite flyovers, radar spillover, military interference. Nothing. Clean data, uncorrupted, confirmed by backup receivers and a parallel antenna. The signal was real. Word traveled fast but quietly. Within 12 hours, data from the Atacama site was under review by 3 other observers. One in Japan, one in South Africa, one in Australia, Cross-confirmation was immediate. This wasn't just a local event. It was universal. The signal had traveled across space to Earth and was captured clearly. No distortion, no delay, and then it was gone. Just like in 1977, a sharp rise, a clean plateau, a slow fade, silence. The researchers didn't panic. They didn't speculate, not publicly. They followed protocol. They wrote incident reports, filed logs, submitted the raw data to the International Telecommunications Union for verification, but behind the scenes, the tone was different. People who had worked in the field for years, some for decades, began saying what others didn't dare. It's back. The wow signal had returned, or something like it. The probability of two random signals, nearly 50 years apart, matching that closely across all parameters, was statistically near zero. Whatever this was, it wasn't chance. There was an odd difference though, subtle but unmistakable. Near the end of the 71 seconds, the signal exhibited a brief irregularity, a tiny frequency drift, less than 1 part in a billion, almost imperceptible. But there, analysts initially thought it might be a Doppler effect caused by movement, either on our end or the transmitters, but the pattern didn't match any known rotation or orbital velocity. It was too clean, too sudden, like a key shift, or an intentional modulation. Some thought it might be a kind of punctuation, a marker. Others called it a signature. Among the researchers, there was a strange consensus. The second signal felt different, not just because of the numbers, but because of the tone. It was almost the same voice, but somehow it sounded older, like something had changed. Not in the data, but in the silence around it. There was weight now, memory, the feeling that this wasn't just a rebroadcast. It was a return. The coordinates matched within 1/10 of a degree of the original 1977. Source somewhere deep, within a patch of sky that contained no known stars, no dust clouds, no active regions. It was, by all accounts, empty, a void, a space between things. Astronomers had long written it off as quiet, featureless, not worth observing. But now, all eyes turned toward it. The void was active. The return of the signal reignited old questions. Was this a message? A beacon? A warning? Why come back now, after nearly 50 years? Was the timing arbitrary, or part of something larger? SETI researchers scrambled to decode the final seconds of the signal. They layered the 1977 data with the 2025 recording. They searched for patterns, intervals, markers, anything that might resemble structure. Some found repeating harmonics. Others claimed there were shifts in amplitude that matched a logarithmic curve. A few said they could hear rhythm, like breathing, like a heartbeat. But nothing was conclusive. Nothing decoded into language. Nothing made sense. Not yet. Theories emerged quickly, though few were voiced out loud. One proposed that the signal was part of a larger cycle, perhaps. Something that repeats every 48 to 50 years, triggered by a celestial alignment or internal clock. Another speculated it was a probe orbiting a distant star, only visible when its rotation aligned perfectly with Earth's position. A third suggested it wasn't a transmission at all, but a reflection. About that something else somewhere out there had sent a signal into the void. and that what we received was only the echo. In that case, Earth may not have been the intended recipient at all. We were just standing in the way. More concerning was the possibility that someone or something had been waiting, that the first signal had been a test, a scan, a ping, and now, decades later, the reply was being issued. A return not because of accident, but because of intent, because we had proven we were still here, still listening. For the public, none of this was known yet. The data hadn't been released. The press hadn't been briefed. But inside the community, something shifted. Emails were exchanged at strange hours. Old files from 1977 were reopened, scanned, digitized. Engineers who had long retired were contacted, asked to remember equipment settings from half a century ago. A quiet urgency crept in, not panic, but a pressure, as if time had begun to move again, as if the countdown, once paused, had resumed, and still the source remained a mystery. A signal from nowhere, identical to the first but not quite, as if it had aged, as if, in the 50 years of silence, something had changed on the other end. In a private briefing between observatory directors, one physicist said quietly, "It's not just that it came back, it's that it waited." And no one had a response to that. Because if the signal had returned by design, if it had watched us, timed us, chosen this moment, then it was more than a message. It was a reminder, and perhaps a promise. They had seen the signal before, or something like it. Same source, same duration, same narrowband signature, same place in the sky. But this time, something changed. It wasn't obvious at first. The waveform was clean. The slope matched the 1977 profile almost perfectly. For 71 seconds, everything seemed familiar, predictable. It was only in the last 4 seconds that the signal broke away, just slightly, a distortion so subtle that most of the automated filters missed it. But the human observers didn't. A soft, sharp bend in the frequency, not a decay, not a dropout, a deliberate shift, like someone nudging a needle just a fraction off center. At first, no one knew what to make of it. Analysts replayed the tail end 100 times, looking for patterns, anomalies, compression errors. There were none. The distortion wasn't noise. It was shaped, contained. It didn't spike or collapse, it moved. Intentionally, some suggested Doppler drift. But the movement didn't align with Earth's rotation. It wasn't orbital motion. It didn't match any known effect of gravity or velocity. It was as if the transmitter had shifted frequency by choice, like a pulse, like punctuation, and then someone said it aloud. One of the senior astronomers on site at Atacama looked at the waveform and said, "It's like it was checking to see if someone was still listening." The room was silent for a long time after that, because once it was said, it couldn't be taken back. The idea was too clean, too plausible, that the signal, after 48 years of silence, had returned, not just to repeat itself, but to change, to adjust, to respond. Because if it changed, it meant it was aware. And if it was aware, it meant we weren't alone in this exchange. We were participants. It didn't behave like a beacon. Beacons repeat. Beacons don't adapt. This adapted. It added something. A small change. A ripple at the edge of the pattern, like someone tapping on glass a second time. A little louder, a little slower, to make sure the sound carried. The spectrogram showed it clearly. A narrow dip, followed by a rise. like a waveform blinking, like an eye, opening and closing, brief, exact, meaningful. Some called it a signature, others a question, but the meaning was less important than the fact of its presence. Something had been added. The question changed again. It was no longer, is it real? It was now, does it know we're here? Because if the shift was deliberate, if it was a test, a reply, or a scan, it meant the transmitter was listening to, not just sending, but waiting, watching, reacting. No one wanted to say intelligence out loud. Not yet. The term carried too much weight, too many implications, but in their private notes, in the margins of the spectrograms and analytic reports, the word appeared anyway, quietly, carefully, underlined. It was impossible not to feel something. The signal had always been a mystery, but now it had become something worse. It had become personal. It felt directed. It felt timed. And that shift at the end, so slight, so strange, felt like an acknowledgement, a nod, a test to see if we would notice. And we had. We had noticed. We had heard it again. And this time, it had heard us too. Engineers tried to replicate the distortion. They fed the signal into models, into artificial systems, trying to force it through algorithms to see what might cause the shape. Nothing matched. Random chance. No, too precise. Too repeatable. It wasn't an error. It was something else. Speculation filled the gap. A modulation key. A handshake. Was it asking for a response? Or had we already responded just by listening? Just by pointing our instruments in the right direction? In a closed session between international observatory leads, one analyst showed both signals, 1977 and 2025 stacked together. She pointed to the final seconds and said, "This is not a repeat. This is version 2. It wasn't just a comeback. It was an update. Something had changed, and yet no one knew what to do next. There was no protocol for this. No hotline. No global message board for first contact. Just researchers staring at data, wondering whether the moment they had waited for their entire careers had already passed, or whether it was just beginning. Some argued for a response. But how? With what? Point a dish at the same coordinates and broadcast a reply. In what language? Using what encoding? And if we did, what might answer? Others said we shouldn't reply at all, that the risk was too great, that if something had noticed us, maybe it was best not to draw more attention. But the truth was, we had already responded, by building receivers, by archiving the signal, by sharing it, publishing it, naming it, by pointing our attention at the stars and refusing to look away. We had answered without a word, and now the signal had blinked. The strange distortion, still unexplained, was quickly nicknamed the turn by several teams, as in, the signal turned, or it turned toward us, or it turned the conversation in a new direction. No one agreed on the name, but they all agreed something had shifted. It didn't feel like noise anymore. It felt like intent. The phrase kept appearing in reports, not a transmission, a check-in, as if something somewhere had marked the date, measured the interval, and decided to speak again. But if this was a test, what happened next? Some believed the distortion contained coordinates. Others thought it was time-encoded, a countdown, a key, or maybe just a pulse to see how the air moved when it struck us, to measure how we responded. Maybe it didn't want words. Maybe it wanted attention, and now it had it. Every major telescope in the world was watching the sky now. The region near Sagittarius, once empty, had become the most observed patch of space on record. Still, no repeat. Just that single 71-second signal, a near-perfect echo of 1977 until the final heartbeat, when it became something else. And that was the part no one could shake. Because it didn't just come back. It changed. It knew we were here. Chapter 4. Theories and Whispers. The moment the second signal was confirmed, official voices began to surface slowly at first. Then, in a coordinated rhythm, statements from observatories, clarifications from research institutions, controlled interviews with radio astronomers. The language was careful, the tone measured. No one used the word alien, not directly, not even once. Instead, they called it an anomaly, a rare, unexplained, narrow-band radio event, an echo of the wow signal, perhaps, but not necessarily connected. They said there was no cause for concern, no indication of a threat, and most importantly, no evidence of intent. Just a signal, just data. But behind those public statements, internal memos circulated. Private discussions painted a different picture, because everyone who would analyze the wave knew this wasn't just another random spike. It was structured, familiar, alarming, and it had returned. Still, science demanded explanations. And so, the first theories arrived, clean, academic, plausible. Some proposed the signal was a timed beacon, a naturally recurring emission triggered by a cosmic clock. Perhaps every 50 years, under certain gravitational alignments, a signal is released from an unknown source, not intelligent, just mechanical, a kind of galactic heartbeat. Others took that further. Maybe it wasn't natural. Maybe it was an artificial beacon, launched long ago by a long-dead civilization set to fire, every half-century across the void, blindly hoping someone would be there to receive it. A kind of interstellar message in a bottle. Not a conversation, but a declaration. We were here. One team suggested it came from a rogue planet, a wandering world without a star, moving silently through space, equipped with ancient tech, still operational. A planet-sized probe, set adrift. If true, that would explain the delay. Maybe the object had only recently come into range again, and when it did, it broadcast. Not to us specifically, but to any receiver in line of sight. The Earth just happened to be in the path. Another group proposed something more unnerving, that the signal came from a satellite, but not one of ours, a foreign construct, invisible to our detection systems, perhaps using passive orbit, or cloaked by its trajectory, a relic from something or someone we've never seen. A ghost satellite. But all of these theories ran into the same problem. Location, the signal, in both 1977 and 2025, originated from the same place. A fixed patch of sky in the constellation Sagittarius, not near a star, not near a cluster, just empty space, deep, black, silent. The region has no known planets, no objects, no emissions. Infrared scans show nothing. Optical scopes see nothing. Even gravitational lensing data returns null. It is, by every measure, void. And that's the part that unsettled people the most. Because if the signal came from there, if it wasn't a reflection or refraction, Then it was sent from something we can't detect, something that doesn't emit light, or heat, or motion. Something invisible. And yet, something powerful enough to broadcast across light years on the hydrogen line. That kind of silence isn't just absence, it's intent. Scientists tried to downplay the strangeness. There's much we don't know, they said. This could be a new kind of astrophysical phenomenon. But privately, some of them admitted they had never seen anything like it. Not just because of what it was, but because of how it behaved. The signal was exact, centered, stable, and it came twice, half a century apart. That's not random. That's a pattern. And if it's a pattern, someone or something is setting the clock. Speculation grew. Some wondered if the signal wasn't the first, just the first we noticed. Radio astronomy only began to monitor deep space frequencies seriously in the mid-20th century. Before that, there was no equipment sensitive enough to detect a narrowband transmission. So what if the beacon had been sending signals every 50 years for centuries or longer? 1927, 1877, 1827, had there been other signals, missed, ignored, absorbed by Earth's atmosphere before detection was possible? That idea spread through the community quietly. The notion that we weren't at the beginning of a story but somewhere in the middle. That the wow signal wasn't the first time someone spoke, just the first time we were finally able to listen. And the second signal wasn't a follow-up. It was a continuation, a pulse in a sequence that had begun long before we knew how to hear it. Some experts tried to keep things grounded. They emphasized natural explanations, unknown objects, cold gas clouds, interstellar refraction, but none of those fit. The frequency was too precise, the waveform too perfect, and the silence around it too absolute. Most cosmic signals come with noise, afterglow, trailing emissions, debris. This one came with nothing, just the signal, then gone, like a door opening and closing. A few brave researchers proposed a more radical theory. What if the signal wasn't meant to be found in real time? What if it was a marker, part of a larger structure we hadn't seen yet? A time capsule triggered by our own development, like something waiting for us to become capable, then activating, watching, measuring, not just seeing that we heard it, but how we reacted. Did we panic? Did we ignore it? Did we share it? Did we try to speak back? If this was a message, they said, then we should assume it's not the first one, just the first that got through. And that meant another could be coming. The official explanations kept circling the same language. Unusual, unexplained, non-terrestrial but inconclusive. Words designed to calm, to delay, to buy time. But more and more scientists were beginning to say what they had long held back, that this wasn't just science. It was something more, a kind of contact, not with a being, not yet, but with a pattern, a rhythm, a presence. And the presence was watching. It started with a leak, a document unsigned, unverified, but stamped with a NASA contractor's watermark appeared in a private research server used by a group of amateur SETI enthusiasts. It wasn't supposed to be seen, not by the public, not by researchers, but once it was there, it spread quietly through forums, encrypted chats, late-night email threads between radio scientists and who hadn't worked in the field for decades. The document was simple, just 2 pages. A memo addressed to a now defunct division of NASA's Deep Space Network, dated 2001. It referenced 3 dates: November 1987, March 1993, August 1999, next to each, a single line, narrowband signal received, consistent with 1977 Ohio event, archive status, classified, entry removed per directive. That was all. No waveform, no data, no location, just acknowledgements, signals detected, noted, and then deleted. The document came from someone calling himself a former subcontractor, a technician who claimed to have worked on radio calibration systems in the late 90s. In an attached message, he said he had seen the logs, brief, redacted references to signals no one had talked about. Nothing public, nothing peer-reviewed, but real, buried. He never knew why, never asked. But when the 2025 signal hit the news cycle, he remembered. He searched. He found a backup copy of the memo in an old server image, and he sent it. Official channels denied everything. NASA said no such signals had ever been detected. Outside the well-known 1977 WOW signal, they dismissed the memo as fabrication. But the style, the formatting, even the language matched real internal communications from the same period. Too closely to ignore. And then a second confirmation appeared. This time from a retired systems engineer from the Goldstone Deep Space Complex. He didn't provide files, just a statement, handwritten. We heard it again in 1999. I ran diagnostics on the array myself. Signal was real. Was told not to archive. That was all he said. No interviews. No follow-up. But it was enough. The pattern was clear. If true, this wasn't the second signal, or even the third. It was the fourth, or the fifth, or more. And the question changed again. Not what the signal was, not where it came from, but why we weren't told. If these returns had happened, why hide them? Why delete the logs? Why let the world believe the WOW signal had been silent for 48 years? What was being protected? Or who? Amid the speculation, one team decided to go deeper. A group of AI researchers in Europe, originally working on natural language processing, models for extraterrestrial message interpretation, fed the 2025 signal into their prototype decoder. The system wasn't designed to translate alien speech. It was designed to identify human recognizable structure, repetition, rhythm, sequence, encoded logic. It didn't look for words. It looked for shape, for design, for memory. The system ran the 2025 waveform against the 1977 signal. Then it overlaid the supposed 1987, 1993, and 1999 timeframes, even without full data. It looked for fractal patterns, and in the final 4 seconds of the 2025, returned the same segment where the signal had bent subtly. Off frequency, it found something unexpected. Modulation intervals that, when passed through a semantic compression model, produced 2 English words. Not audio, not translation, just correlation. We remember. No one believed it at first. The researchers ran the data through 5 separate models. The results varied, but the top correlation each time remained the same. We remember. Not remember us. Not remember this. just that, a statement, a presence, a claim. It could have been a coincidence. Some pattern in the signal mimicking human-readable intervals. But it didn't feel like that. It felt pointed. And it raised a terrifying question. Remember what? And remember who? If the signal was real and intentional, then memory meant observation. It meant continuity. Not a one-off event. Not a flyby or a chance alignment. It meant someone or something was keeping track. Across decades. Across silence. And if the phrase we remember was a message, then it wasn't just acknowledgement. It was something else. A response. A warning. A return. Skeptics dismissed it quickly. They said the AI model was overfitted. That the signal contained nothing linguistic. That humans were seeing meaning where none existed. But even they couldn't explain the pattern. Why the signal had returned with an altered shape. Why the AI model had found structure where noise should have been. Why the frequencies aligned so perfectly across multiple decades. More disturbing were the implications of the deletion. If someone knew about the previous signals and chose to hide them, then this wasn't just a scientific mystery. It was a controlled narrative. And if that narrative was being managed, then someone already had a theory, a working model of what the signals were, and what they meant. Some began to dig. Old archives, military radio logs, telecommunications anomalies, anything from 1987, 1993, 1999. In each year, they found strange gaps, brief moments when civilian observatories lost sync. Calibration errors, sudden schedule changes. Nothing conclusive, but enough to suggest something had been noticed. And now, with "we remember" possibly embedded in the waveform, the tone shifted again. Because if the signal was observing, measuring, recording, what was it remembering? Were we part of its memory? Was Earth being logged, catalogued, tracked? Was this a machine? Or was this a mind? Some scientists pulled back, refused interviews. Research threads were quietly shut down, forums deleted, academic access revoked. It was unclear who ordered the silence. But suddenly, fewer people were talking. The memo was dismissed as a hoax. The AI research team declined further comment. But those who had seen the results couldn't unsee them. The signal wasn't just a recurrence. It was a voice. And that voice had a memory, and it was waiting. Chapter 5. Where the signal comes from. To signals. 48 years apart. Different equipment, different observatories, different generations of scientists, but both pointing to the exact same patch of sky. Right ascension, 19 hours. Declination, negative 26 degrees. Constellation, Sagittarius. Coordinates confirmed, logged, peer-reviewed. And yet, despite everything we know about the observable universe, that part of space remains silent, dead, empty, a black square cut out of the sky. No visible stars, no measurable dust, no spectral signatures, not even background radiation at expected levels. It's not just quiet, it's quiet in the wrong way. Cosmic microwave background radiation, the afterglow of the Big Bang, fills every corner of the universe. But in that region, the signal is thinner, dimmer, off. It's not just a cold spot. It's something less. They call it a void. But a void is just the absence of something. This feels different. This feels deliberate. For decades, that sector of the sky has been ignored, not out of negligence, but because there was nothing to see. Optical telescopes record only black. Infrared scopes return static. Even gravitational lensing, a technique capable of detecting dark matter through its distortion of light, shows no curvature, no interference. It's not bending space. It's not masking mass. It's just there, a blank. And that's what made the signal so strange. Because for a signal to arrive, something must transmit it. And yet there's nothing at the source. No star system, no object, no comet, asteroid, nebula. No orbiting body that could explain a repeating emission. Just an open patch of sky where light goes in and nothing comes out. In the words of one astrophysicist, it's like shouting into a canyon and hearing someone whisper back, but when you shine a flashlight, there's no canyon, just fog. Some began to wonder if the location itself was the message, that whoever or whatever sent the signal had chosen the void on purpose, not because it was rich in data, but because it was silent, uncontaminated, the perfect black canvas for a message to stand out. After all, in the chaos of the sky, where stars burn and planets spin and galaxies scream across time, how better to be heard than to speak from nowhere? Others had a different idea. What if it wasn't just a quiet part of space? What if it wasn't space at all? One theory, whispered among physicists late at night, was that the region wasn't empty, it was hidden. A spatial anomaly, a rupture in the fabric of the observable universe. A kind of lens, not of gravity, but of dimension. Not a place, but an edge. And if that was true, if the void was more than a shadow, then perhaps what we received wasn't a transmission across distance, but across something else. A fold, a slip, a seam. That would explain why nothing else came from the source. No light, no heat, no radiation, just that one narrow, deliberate signal, like someone opening a door, saying one thing and closing it again. Not to save power, but to stay hidden. Theories like this were not widely accepted, too speculative, too dependent on unproven physics. But they didn't go away. Because the data didn't go away. Because no matter how many times we pointed our most sensitive instruments at that patch of sky, nothing changed. The signal had come from nowhere. And yet it had come. A few researchers proposed it wasn't from that location at all. That what we received was a kind of echo. A projection, like a mirror catching a flash of light from somewhere far beyond. But that too fell apart under scrutiny. The waveform was too stable, too precise. It wasn't bouncing. It was arriving, direct. Others went further. What if the void was a gate? Not a metaphorical one, but an actual portal stable. Silent, dormant, except when used. What if the signal wasn't just coming through the void, but from inside it? And what if inside wasn't part of our universe? The phrase they used was non-local origin, not from somewhere else in space, but from outside space-time as we understand it. A transmission that didn't cross a distance, but crossed a boundary. In that model, the void is a fixed point, a receiver station on the edge of the known, and the signal is a knock from the other side. Crazy, maybe, but every other theory had failed. Nothing about the source made sense unless you broke the rules, unless you let go of the idea that all things must come from somewhere. Because this didn't. It came from nowhere, and it came twice. Some religious groups latched onto the story. They said the void was spiritual, a window into something beyond human comprehension. Others called it a warning, a sign. But even among the scientists, the tone had shifted. Theories turned to metaphors, equations to speculation, because the more we looked at the void, the less it felt like space, and the more it felt like design. Was it artificial? Was it old? Had it always been there, or had it been placed? Some suggested the void might not be stationary, that it moved, that we only noticed it now because it had drifted into alignment with our planet's orbit and axial position just long enough to deliver a message, then fade back into camouflage. Others said it had always been in place, that Earth's technological timeline had simply taken this long to catch up, to tune in, that the message had been waiting for us, dormant, until we were capable of hearing it. And now we had, and what we heard was a whisper from nowhere, and perhaps a doorway. Because if a signal can come from nowhere, if something can speak from a place that doesn't exist, then maybe what we call reality isn't whole. Maybe the map is incomplete. Maybe there are places we weren't meant to see, and voices we weren't meant to hear. But we heard them anyway, and the door might not close again. At first, the assumption was simple. A message had been sent, and we had received it. The signal, the narrowband hydrogen line anomaly, was seen as an outbound transmission, an intentional act of communication. But that assumption was based on a human framework. We send messages. We wait for replies. We believe in dialogue. But not everything that speaks wants to be heard. And not everything that sends is trying to communicate. As data from the second signal continued to be analyzed, a new theory began to take shape, not from the astronomers, not from the astrophysicists, but from the systems engineers, the people who understand not just the stars, but the machines built to listen to them. One of them, a retired specialist from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, said it plainly: the signal didn't come to us. It was reflected from somewhere else. That single sentence changed everything. If true, it meant the source, what we thought of as the origin, wasn't the sender. It was the mirror, a relay, a silent station, cloaked in the black, designed not to transmit, but to receive. And what we picked up wasn't the signal itself. It was the echo, the bounce. Something had been sent into the void, and we just happened to be standing in the path of the reflection. Other engineers backed up the idea. The waveform characteristics, the initial spike, the plateau, the final modulation, all matched what you might see from a high-precision reflector. Not a source, but a redirection, a deflection, something angled to avoid detection, yet precise enough to maintain fidelity. If that was true, then it meant someone else was out there, transmitting, and someone or something was positioned between us, designed to intercept. That theory led to another. What if the void wasn't empty at all? What if it was a cloaked station, artificial, ancient and hidden, built not to be seen, but to observe? In that case, the silence wouldn't be natural. It would be strategic, a form of camouflage, a way to stay dark, invisible, embedded in a region of space no one would think to look, until the reflection slipped, until the message leaked. The implications were immediate. It meant the signal wasn't for us. It never was. We were the bystanders, the accidental witnesses. We had been listening in on something else, something older, something ongoing. Not a broadcast, but a surveillance feed, a scan, a ping, or worse, a two-way channel where one side watched and the other waited. The location began to make more sense. The void, with its perfect silence, would be the ideal place for a listening post. No background radiation, no stellar noise, a clean signal environment, a vacuum, acoustically speaking, and from there, someone could monitor vast sectors of space. Or, perhaps, just one, Earth. Some researchers quietly proposed the idea that the void station, if that's what it was, had been placed deliberately, not just in physical space, but in time, positioned at a fixed point, waiting for us to reach technological maturity, waiting for us to begin listening. And when we did it, listened back, not to speak, but to study. The AI-generated phrase, "we remember," took on a different tone under this theory. It wasn't a greeting. It was a report, an acknowledgement that something had been logged. Something had been seen, remembered. Not a message to us, but a message about us. That changed the shape of the fear, because it meant we weren't the center of the story. We weren't being addressed. We were being archived. The signal might not be a voice, it might be a note, a notation in a ledger, a time-stamped entry in a long list of observed civilizations. And if so, the list might be longer than we imagine. Some even argued the return of the signal wasn't intentional, that the cloak around the void station had failed, glitched, let slip a trace of what had always been there, like a submarine surfacing, just long enough to be seen before vanishing, again beneath the dark. Others had a darker view. What if it wasn't a glitch? What if it was a test, to see who noticed, who reacted, who responded? Because every telescope pointed toward that void. Every system logged the signal, and those logs were shared across countries, across agencies, across platforms. If something was watching us, it wouldn't need to send a message. It would just need to wait, watch how we interpret, how we organize, how we handle the unknown. We think we're the ones listening, but maybe we're the ones being watched. This idea became known informally as the I hypothesis. The concept that the void is not a source of light or sound, but of observation. That behind the silence, there is attention, calculation, memory, and that attention has a shape, not random, not passive, focused. If the station is real, if it exists, then the question is no longer where it is. We already know that. The coordinates haven't changed. The real question is, how long has it been watching? Because if this was its first message, why now? And if it wasn't its first, what came before? Some believe Earth is not unique in this story, that other civilizations, now gone, were also logged, observed, measured, and then, what? Forgotten, archived, or erased. The scariest part of all was that the signal didn't ask anything. It didn't instruct. It didn't invite. It simply arrived, pulsed, and vanished. That's not communication. That's surveillance. And surveillance implies an imbalance. One side seen, one side unseen. One side known, one side unknowable. And we are on the wrong side of that equation. No one knows what happens next. If anything, maybe the station will speak again. Maybe it won't. Maybe the silence was never for us. But the fact remains, we saw it, we heard it, and it saw us too. A signal came, then silence. 50 years later, it came back. We still don't know what it means, or if we were ever meant to hear it. The real question is, next time it returns, will we answer? Or maybe we already did, and now they're on their way.